Big bomb bangers.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jews and Gentiles, sharps and squares, welcome back to episode 30 of 90 Degrees, the show where we discuss the right sports betting angles. I'm your host, Kevin Davis, and today we're bringing on G Stack George, host and creator of the Monday Grind podcast. But before we bring George on, we want to give a quick thank you to our sponsors over at Pinnacle Sportsbook. Pinnacle is the world's sharpest sportsbook and is now available in Ontario. Find out what professional bettors have known for decades. Pinnacle is where the bettors play, taking sharp action every day. No limits, low synthetic hold, and it's a must have for those with a top down approach. Must be 19 plus in Ontario. Sadly, I can't play because I'm in the United States, or else I would. But if you do play, please do so responsibly. So, George, welcome to the show. Why don't you tell our audience how you fit into the sports betting space?
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for having me. I have been a professional sports bettor since 2019. What that means is this is my main source of income. I don't work another job. Football is my season where I'm actively working. And right now there's a little bit of downtime. So in the meantime, I do a little bit of media, want to inform the gambling space without, touting here's what the winners are, just more about the process and how successful bettors operate.
So, you are a professional bettor focusing mainly on football. How do you get enough bets in to make a living at sports betting, considering it's not every day, it's seasonal?
Well, fortunately, football is the easiest sport to get a lot of liquidity down on. And I've grown over the last 4 years big enough to the point where I can make enough money and survive. I don't just bet football, but it's just combat sports, boxing, political events. These are some of the smaller things that I'm betting. So it's not like I'm not doing any work in the meantime. But yeah, football, I'm lucky enough to have a big enough bankroll that I can do a lot of my work in just 5 or 6 months.
I mean, that is incredible. So, the 6 months that you aren't doing your football work, what's a typical day like for George?
Um, Going to the gym, not often enough. Cigars, getting together with coffee for friends. I'm lucky enough that I know a couple other people who also have free time during the day. I do a lot of work in the off season though. It's not just like, hey, I relax until August. I'm constantly looking at like updated rosters. I'm watching through film the past year. I'm trying to work on different equations and figure out if there's some inefficiencies in what I'm doing and if I can get better at them. Paying attention to the draft because luckily the draft has become a pretty good betting event. Again, not the most liquidity, but it's still good enough that it's worth my time. And that's pretty much my off season. And then around July is like the last month before things fully ramp up. So that's when I get vacation time and downtime and I'm able to relax.
Yeah, so it certainly sounds like a life. So, September comes. What does a typical Sunday night or Monday morning look like?
So happy you asked me. Sunday morning is I end up getting together with my betting partner, my cousin. We have the whole six screen set up for all the games. We're doing some last minute work just to see some of the inactives based on like if there's one or two key players that are on the fence. We don't do much betting on Sunday. It's very rare, but if we can move fast enough on injury information, we will. Then I'm actually a fan of football. I love it. I watch the games religiously. I'm not a live better, so I'm enjoying all the games happening at the same time. I'm making notes of players that get injured throughout the day because there's injury reports available Sunday evening, but sometimes they don't pick up on all of them, like offensive linemen, some of the positions that are not as key. Like obviously they're going to tell you about all the fantasy guys that got hurt from there, I watch football the entire day, and Sunday to Monday, I barely sleep. So Sunday night, I'm looking at okay, how did I do for the day? Then I'm like processing, okay, here's all the injuries that are going to be something to look for heading into the next day. I take an early look at the numbers, the opening lines. If there's anything I can pick off that's way off. Otherwise, I'd like to have a little bit more information throughout the day. I get barely 4 or 5 hours of sleep, and then Monday is the longest day. Monday, I watch every game that I was unable to watch because when there's 8 or 9 games happening at once, you can only really focus in on 3 or 4 properly at the same time. Even though we got 6 screens going, two of them are kind of like side, peripheral, just keep an eye on them. And then watch those games in full, make my notes, adjust my ratings of teams, then go through the data, pull it, and come up with a numerical rating that I use, a formula that I use, and then from there, okay, let's look at how the next week's opponents match up against each other because I always look at it as like rock paper scissors. Power ratings will only tell you so much, but certain teams match up better against other teams than teams that maybe they're potentially much better than. So there's there's potential advantages there when you can pick off some good matchups. It's very boxing like, right? Styles make fights, and it's the same concept for football.
Now, how do you massage those power ratings for the key numbers?
So a lot of people believe like, okay, you got to normalize to market, and I'm a bit stubborn in that I actually don't like to normalize to market. I kind of stick with my guns, and sometimes it burns me. Like last year, it took me until like week 6 or 7 to realize that the Chargers were not the house that I thought they were. And I think it was the Seattle Seahawks game where they got blown out and like picked off. And I'm like, that was the harsh reality. That I'm like, okay, I'm clearly too high. Let me get a little bit closer adjusted to market. But then there's teams that I'm stubborn on, like say the Cincinnati Bengals. I was stubborn on them all year, and I thought the market was wrong on them all year, and I didn't want to massage the ratings to come back to market value. I was pretty concrete that I had good information, and a lot of that meant betting Cincinnati later in the week. They were one of the teams that I had to wait for the line to get bet into place, like the game against Pittsburgh, where they open up as like a 6 point favorite and then they get bet down all the way to like a 3 point favorite. I had to wait till Sunday to get that number that I wanted. So that's kind of how I do the ratings. I don't mind going off market and being different.
Well, I guess what I meant to ask, although that's a good answer, is if you put the two teams' power ratings next to each other and you factor in home field and have a team favored by 5 points or 5.5, like how do you make sure about whether it's like a 6 or 4.5 or a 5?
So I'll power rate in the dead zone. I have no problem with that. And I will read which way the line is going to move. Like, say I rank Team A 5 points better than Team B, and it's lined up at let's say it's lined up at -4. I could bet that at 4 because I feel like I got a small edge, but I'm fine waiting to see if the market is willing to go to 3.5 or 3 because losing 4 to 4.5 is not as big a deal to me as opposed to the potential gain of getting to three and a
Mm.
half or 3. So I have no problem ranking numbers in the dead zone. I don't try to normalize two key numbers. I find those discrepancies where my edges come from.
Now, as the week goes on and some props start getting offered, do you start hitting the props and what's your approach to that?
So I had this last year was the first year I had to get into props because in Ontario we legalized and we got all these sports books, but we lost daily fantasy in doing so. So it forced me to get into player props, and it's still not as big a repertoire um, because for two reasons. Number one is it's a lot of different work that doesn't correlate with what I want to do, and the second part is if you're betting sides and totals mostly, sports books tend to give you a little bit more leniency as opposed to props is a good way to get yourself limited and booted from a book a lot faster.
Yes, certainly. It's definitely different at a scale at your betting where you're trying to make a living rather than just trying to make some money doing what you like to do.
Yeah, if you're betting with paper heads, which I still do, they're not gonna take too kindly to you picking off some prop numbers. They're gonna give you a quicker hook.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is crazy because NFL, I feel like, oh, it's an NFL prop. I can go a bit more crazy on this than a different sport. Um, One sports book that I cleaned up pretty good on NFL last year, only doing reverse teasers, finally limited me after NFL season. And then it took them 2 weeks after they limited me to take down the reverse teaser function on their site. But they were having 7 point NFL reverse teasers you can do on spreads or totals, two teamers, plus 800.
Yeah, that's like I've had books before where the pleaser line was just way off, and you hit them once or twice, and they'll never offer that again.
But I wasn't even handicapping the games. I was just, honestly, I was just using the bet stamp tool. I would enter the bets in based on how each leg of the reverse teaser would pay if it was a single bet and see what the CLV it said was. So of course I went through my own reverse teaser rules, where it's the opposite of a teaser rule, where you want to go through zero if you're doing a spread, and you want to do totals, and be like, okay, this is like a CLV of 5%. This is pretty good. And I was only betting on Sunday, so I found a way to only bet NFL on Sunday and win.
That's incredible.
But now it doesn't exist anymore. But it lasted the whole
You got a
season,
whole year though, right? Before
a whole year.
they stopped it.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd be sitting there at the bar watching the games. People know that I work in sports betting, and they would say, why did you bet this?" And I'm like, I don't know a single player on this team, or maybe I know a couple. It's just the math made sense.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Um, I mean, it does help to do some of the qualitative work that you do, combined with creating your own numbers, where you really watch every single game and then could input that in the numbers.
You know why I find it important is sometimes, and listen, the data will tell you a lot of stuff. Like take Minnesota for example, the data said they were a lot worse than their record, but the data sometimes isn't enough because there's some games that flip on circumstance, and it might only be two or three instances, and you can pick up a little bit more information about a team because if a team is struggling to move their offense consistently, but they have two or three drives where they explode and they get the job done, the data gives you a balanced metric of, hey, this is a successful offense. Whereas, okay, what is a successful offense? Is it a successful explosive offense? Is it a successful consistent offense that can march the field at all times and control the clock? There's things that the data doesn't pick up that film watching still gives you.
Now, if someone is looking at how explosive a team is playing and they're not betting high limits like you, is that an opportunity for them to look at alternate markets?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
So a lot of what I look at is like, okay, certain sports, there's going to be less explosive and a smaller standard deviation. Those sometimes are good for teasers. The sports where there's more variance, that's good for the reverse teasers. That same book that had the reverse teasers for NFL also had it for college football, and it had it for bowl games. So the first 2 days of bowl games, they had the reverse teaser thing down. And I'm like, okay, maybe they realized it, and then they put it back up. And I found that the standard deviation for college football bowl games is larger than any week of the season, including week one.
Well, like I always tell people, embrace the variance, right? Like we talked about player props. Like take the New Orleans Cleveland game. If you remember the Blizzard game, it became a rush bowl where everybody was running the ball, and like there was opportunities in like Taysom Hill and Nick Chubb and everybody, but like alternative overs. Like embrace the variance of when there's a team that's a little bit more volatile either way, the alternate routes at bigger prices is often a better way to go about things.
Well, what about live betting? Because you watch all these games. How much is live betting part of your arsenal?
It's not, and I'll tell you for two reasons. Number one, I like to enjoy the game. I find people who live bet have to be in front of screens and constantly looking at the numbers. I also don't like the fact that the stream is behind. And then the third aspect of it is, but I will like Kyler Murray versus New England on Monday Night Football. If you remember, Kyler Murray tears his knee on the first play. I picked off a book that was slow moving on that. In a moment like that, I'm not betting numbers anymore. I'm betting a completely different game, a different circumstance. San Fran and Philadelphia in the playoffs. Philadelphia was a hell of a live bet when San Fran lost all their quarterbacks. So, spur of the moment, gigantic injury that changed the nature of the game. I will quickly try to grab a line and pick off some low hanging fruit. But outside of that, I actually just want to enjoy the game. I also want to learn from the game. There was a period over the first 5 weeks of the season where I think I only had two bets for primetime games. And a lot of people love forcing action during primetime games. To me, those are learning opportunities. I don't have a bet, so I get to go in unbiased, make notes, and learn a little bit more of these two teams. It's part of the reason why I'm like addicted to football. I love watching it. I love enjoying it. And I find with live betting, when you're still working, the entertainment factor goes away.
Now, do you think the commentary during the games is valuable if you're a bettor, even though they're not talking about betting?
No, very rarely do they. Like half the time, I'm not even paying attention fully to the commentary. I'm watching with somebody. I'm having a conversation about the game and what we've just seen. When the Manning Bowl came around, the Manning cast on Mondays, I loved it because it gave us a little bit of different insight. But I find the commentary is off-putting. However, sometimes the commentator or the sideline reporter might have an injury news that isn't available yet on Twitter. The news hasn't broke, so sometimes, and it's very rare, you get the needle in the haystack moment where they give you something that you can work with.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, they occasionally will provide some useful information, or they'll be like, "Yeah, such and such was taken to the locker room, and he was able to walk there on his own without a trainer."
For sure, or like kickers, right? Like the news might not break, but if they say, he strained his hamstring during warm-ups and he struggled to make it from this distance, it might be a little piece of information. But again, I don't necessarily look to attack live betting. You strike me as somebody who is attacking them live betting. No, you're also enjoying the game?
If I'm even watching them, I mean, CFL. I watch all the CFL games. There's only 4 games a week, and they're not the same time as each other. One of the reasons I'm
Yeah,
huge into CFL, I can watch every game. Um, I
I
can crack open a Labatt Blue, even though they're harder to get in the United States, um, and just watch the game. But I mean, college football, I love watching the games too. Part of the difficulty is I usually only try and attack live lines at halftime because of the time lag, and just before making an opinion, just looking book to book to see if any of the derivatives or main lines are ever off from each other, which is becoming less and less so.
you used to be able to arb halftime second half bets, but it feels like everybody's using the same software and all copying each other now, and it's very rare to find wide discrepancies anymore.
Yeah, and then like if it's a small market sport like CFL preseason, there was one book here that had live lines for the first week, and then for the second week they took away the live lines because I'm like they used a traditional live line model of we're going to base it off the score of the game and how a 3.5 point favorite up by 7 points, what percentage of the time they normally win. But they wouldn't factor in each team using different lineups for each quarter because it's preseason.
It's funny you say that because in the XFL there was actually a couple tremendous live betting opportunities, especially early in the season where everybody was so certain who was good and who wasn't, which was wild to me. It was a wild concept that everybody had such a certainty about a league that never existed. So there was opportunities, but I got spinning wheeled once on a play, and the quarterback fumbled and it was returned for a touchdown, and it reminded me of all the reasons why I hate live betting within the game when it's not in commercial.
Yeah, I mean XFL I was doing a lot of money line underdog spread middles for first half and full game
Yeah,
because I don't think people were accounting for the extra point strategy as much as they should have.
100%. Like, and that's the reason I found XFL had huge opportunities was okay. It's not an established league. Nobody knows who these players are or how good they are. Injury reports were harder to find, um, and it was a different dynamic, a scoring dynamic. So I always love to like put on my raincoat during the variants and try to find my angles in. I was talking with Matt Landis about this in the NFL draft. Everybody likes to bet like the certain events of like over under, draft positions and stuff like that. And a lot of the stuff that I like to do was bet the markets that were multi-way markets with large prices because the draft isn't a certainty. You're trying to handicap what 32 individual general managers are thinking about 250 different players. And I find when you embrace the variance, there's a lot of upside and potential there.
Yeah, I mean, it is crazy looking at the drafts of if you find something wild that happens, what the payouts out there are.
Yeah, yeah. I like oftentimes we're so sure about who the first player at a position is. I remember when there was four offensive tackles that were supposed to go in the top 12, and the guy who was priced fourth went first because the Giants general manager liked Andrew Thomas, the offensive tackle, more than he liked Mekhi Becton, Jedrick Wills, and Tristan Wirfs. So the majority of the league might think that Tristan Wirfs was the best offensive tackle, but the Giants, who were picking the highest, thought Andrew Thomas was their favorite tackle. And he was like plus 800 on just before the draft kicking off. So I always say, like, not everything is a certainty and stop pretending and betting as things are certainties. When there's more variables, when there's more variance. So, like, you use the XFL as an example. When people scored a touchdown, they could go for 1, 2, or 3 points. There was also the 4th and 15 aspect instead of onside kick. Like, there was a lot of different circumstances that created a lot of different betting opportunities.
Now, like you focus on like the spring football. Do you ever do like any basketball, baseball, or other major sports, or you just stick to football when it comes to sports?
No, like I will occasionally take a future for basketball or hockey if I want to just have something to watch because my Leafs and Orlando Magic seem to never have a deep playoff run in them, and I need somebody to entertain me. But I've cut out all the bad habits of sports betting, and it happened a few years ago. I call it like slot machine gambling, betting without an edge. Uh, I just don't understand the basketball and hockey market. I don't know when the injury reports come out. I don't know when and why the markets move, and I'm unwilling to take the time to do it because if I did, I would never have an off season. And frankly, I just want to enjoy some aspects of my life. I don't want to grind in front of the screen for 12 months a year, 12 hours a day. I'm already exhausted doing it within football season.
So, considering that you're focusing on high liquidity markets and not doing it year round per se, um, how much of your action is through rec books um, versus PPH and sharp books?
90% through PPHs and sharp books.
So even as a bettor who's doing a highly efficient, high liquid market, you still have to go the PPH and sharp route.
Yes. And it's unfortunate.
Shouldn't they want your action considering, how little work they have to do to get the number?
Do they want no believe me, you're constantly having to find new books and new accounts, and sometimes you have to have meetings to make sure you get paid what you're owed. So there are challenges in what I do. There's also upside, like there's a lot of slow moving PPHs and you can pick them off for bad lines because they some of them are binded to a sharp book and they all move accordingly, but sometimes you can catch them napping. Remember the Justin Herbert game against the Jacksonville Jaguars where Tuesday or Wednesday, the news started to leak. There was no news, but it was became aware that hey, Herbert's really hurt, and the line went from like 7.5 to 3 that afternoon. And there was a couple slow moving PPHs that got got hit because of it because they just didn't adjust fast enough. So the trade off is, you can have an advantage, you get credit. Problem is they'll kick you out fast. You got to worry about being stiffed. So there's the balance of that.
I mean, it just keeps backing up my theory that like people, even if you're good at betting, you shouldn't want to be a professional bettor just because of how much of a pain in the ass it is.
Yeah, once you learning how to win is not even half the battle. It's learning how to keep accounts and get paid is the real battle.
I mean, I kind of like, just having a regular job, betting on sports and making some money, but not having to deal with Fat Tony.
Yeah, I know. I've had to sit down with Fat Tony a couple times.
Yeah, and sure, with your math background, you can, build a model to say the probability of somebody winning, but then you have to figure out the probability of actually getting paid.
Yeah, the leakage.
So now uh, college football, do you mess around with that?
I don't, and I wish I could, because I know how gigantic the opportunities are. Saturday is actually a working day for me. There's there's something called OLG pools here in Canada, and basically it's a weekly pot of like $500,000-600,000 that they give out. So it's like everybody looks at like, oh, Circa's paying out $6 million, and it's awesome. Imagine 18 weeks of $500,000 to $600,000 pools every week. So in order to play that pool, like they give you options, $5 to play to get one entry, and essentially you got to pick every team correctly if they're going to win or lose. But for $10, you can take one game out because you're just playing both sides, and for 20, you're taking two games out because you play all four sides, and you play 80, and then once you get to a certain number and you're eliminating a lot of games to create an edge, it costs a lot of money, but it also means a lot of legwork going around different stores in the city, and it takes up like 3-4 hours on my afternoon on Saturdays. So unfortunately, I can't watch college football and enjoy it and learn the sport as much as I'd like to.
Yeah, because you're trying to get down at the 7-Eleven or gas station or Tim Hortons.
Yeah, they used to limit you to $100 a store, but the ticket form is $80 for a 4 game box ticket. That's the max. So if you're trying to put $10,000 in action, you got to hit 100 stores, or at $80, you got to hit 120 stores. So we'd have a route, and you got a guy who's going in and out of your car, and you're driving around hitting different convenience stores. It's a process. They've bettered the process now. They let you bet $500 per store, so it
Okay.
cuts down, it cuts down some of your running around. But that's what happens when you're trying to get a lot of money down. They won't just let you bet $10,000 at one store and get all your action in. So that eats the afternoon trying to get your money and move it around. And the reason I have to wait till Saturday is because you don't want to lock $10,000 of action in on Thursday, Friday for and then lose some information come Saturday. That's going to hurt you. And it's not like you can pick off a number before it moves. It's a different market. It's just a straight up winner market, so it eats up a lot of my Saturday.
Yeah, are you able to find like a shopping mall where there's multiple stores that are offering it?
Yeah, we have routes, and all the cluster areas where there's 5 or 6 convenience stores or gas stations, and you go into a shopping mall and there's 4 kiosks. We have different routes in different areas, and then the other part is with Ontario Lottery Gaming Corporation. You have to write down which store you want at, so that if you're going to cash $100,000 ticket, they know it's yours, and you verified that you played it at that store. The ticket itself doesn't show that. So that's you're charting your information. So you got your route, you're picking, okay, which ticket did I play at which store while you're running around.
Yeah, it sounds like a real life scavenger hunt every single week. Um, which means I'm kind of worried if you're at Bet Bash 3 when we have the scavenger hunt there. Because the OLG guys, like, right now I'm going to put him as the betting favorite.
Okay. I didn't know there is a scavenger hunt. What is that all about?
Yes, I mean, last episode of 90 Degrees, we had Spanky on talking about Bet Bash. They're going to have a scavenger hunt with a cash prize, and you don't know who's in your group until the day of the scavenger hunt.
I think I am gonna spend the day at Stadium Swim during this scavenger event. That doesn't sound like fun to me. I'm a big fat guy, and riding around in Vegas in the hot summer in August is not appealing to me.
Even if it's an electric assist bike.
Oh, I can drive around on like a scooter bike. Yeah, that's different.
That's what I'm thinking. They have it in New York. I don't know if they have it in Vegas, where once you start pedaling, you get like an electric boost. But once you're at a certain speed, it'll stop.
Uh,
So you stop at a traffic light, you start pedaling. Instead of waiting, you hit like 15 miles an hour right away.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. I'm gonna have to look more into that event. I was more looking forward to like the speed networking,
Of
the
course.
Billy Walters interview, the legacy party, and then the Hall of Fame induction. Those were kind of the highlight events for me.
Yeah, I mean, all I can tell you about Bet Bash is like the whole thing is a highlight event.
I also owe like everybody a first drink. I think I've told like 10 different people first drink on me, so it's gonna be expensive. It's gonna be an expensive trip.
Not if you're only at the open bar where it's already the drinks are included.
This is why you're a smart man. See, that's an advantage play. I'm gonna buy the first drink at the open bar.
So now you mentioned that, and I love that you mentioned this. You love betting on politics, as I do. Kind of like, can you go through your process of political betting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the markets are determined by polling. And here's the thing: with polling, you have to understand how the polling is done and what they're sampling. A lot of polls skew liberal. They skew to the left. They oversample the left. It's a lot of it is with Homeline. It skews older. When you can actually look at like on a more demographic level, I also was lucky enough for 5 years to work in the news media world where I met with a lot of political power players, and I often discuss with them internal polling numbers because those are often way better than what's available publicly. And you can find some real edges uh, attacking the markets because the markets are lining up to what the polls are saying. And lately they've been wrong, right? They were wrong when they thought Hillary would beat Trump. They were wrong with Brexit, and they were wrong when they thought a big Republican red wave was coming in the midterms. And you were picking off a lot of good numbers if you understood how to find actual good value. You also have to have a sense of the direction of the country, or the momentum or what we're working towards, because a lot of the numbers are just staked to polling.
Now, you were mentioning the polls skewing liberal. I just wanted to point something out for our listeners in the States. Canada has four major political parties. You have the Bloc Québécois, which is in Quebec. They're sort of like a separatist, pro Quebec party. And then for the rest of Canada, as well as Quebec, you have the Conservative Party, which is your center right party. You have the Liberal Party, which is a center left party. And then you also have the New Democratic Party, which is a left wing party that wins a lot of seats.
Yeah, I would say it's like our NDP is like AOC Bernie Sanders of the American range, and then the Joe Biden, the more centrist left is where the liberals tend to be, and then the conservatives are a lot like the Republicans in the states, and that's kind of for those who aren't familiar with Canadian politics. That's kind of like our political spectrum.
Yeah, and then the geography, I would say, of the Canadian elections are like the prairie. The prairies are conservative, and British Columbia is swing, Ontario is swing, and Ontario has the most people. And Quebec, it always depends on how many people are voting for Bloc Quebec. And then, if their numbers go down or up, who it's pulling from. And then you have the Maritimes, which are liberal.
Now, I like betting American politics because that's where you can actually get some serious liquidity down. I remember during the 2020 election, I I was firing a lot in that election through Pinnacle because Pinnacle was offering some incredible limits. Pinnacle was offshore at the time, and now it's legal in Ontario. The only downside was because Trump's resistance to acknowledge that he lost the election. Uh, it didn't pay out for 2 months. Like I think it was the day they certified it, January 6th is finally when Pinnacle released all the winning bets.
Yeah, I mean that's like definitely something crazy. Is what determining like what's the definition of a winner? Because I'm also thinking if you go all the way back to 1960, because that's how you're going to do if you're going to have a large sample size at presidential elections. So 1960, Kennedy versus Nixon. Um, it was like a nail biter, but Kennedy won because of all the dead people voting in Illinois, and some voter fraud in Texas, and some alleged voter fraud in Hawaii. Like, if you had political betting back then, you would have had a lot of controversy over determining who won that. But no one's going to mention that because Kennedy's so well revered. People want to forget that that was a close election.
Yeah, and it pops up every now and then. I mean, Bush and Gore would have been an interesting time for how long you would have to wait to get paid out in Florida. So I was also betting state by state, and one of the bigger states I was betting was Michigan was going to Joe Biden, and so like some of the states that did certify and it was acknowledged got paid out early, but like Michigan was also waiting till January 6th to get paid out.
I would say that for the last presidential election, I found some really good values on betting the chalk in certain solid states because I was just figure like, okay, some of these states are less elastic. Like, there's a difference between betting a Republican to win in Alabama versus betting a Republican to win in Wisconsin. Because Wisconsin, has heavy swings, and Alabama is almost always heavily polarized. Like Mississippi, for example, the Democrat running for every single election there is always going to get the same 42 to 44% of the vote. It doesn't matter the quality of the candidate; they always reliably get that amount.
And that's like the bigger betting opportunities within the states that are traditionally swing or can go either way. The whole Rust Belt and Florida and Ohio and North Carolina, there was a lot of different states in play, and there was a lot of good prices in the last election.
I mean, it's going to be interesting to see if they ever start doing spread betting for elections.
I think they have to because I read that the handle for the election was like 300, upwards of 300 million. And if they do it right, this thing could become, outside of the Super Bowl, the second biggest betting event in America. It's an excellent everybody. I'm a political junkie, so I'm not just looking at what like the surface is about the political temperature of the country. I love looking a little bit underneath, and I find those are the bigger opportunities because again, a lot of the lines are staked to the polling that everybody has access to, and then some of the underground political temperature, like you know, boots on the ground, like some of that level, there's some opportunities and some information and some real edges there.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like combining the polling, kind of understanding the sample sizes, where they're getting everything. If you're not doing presidential, looking at a congressional race, trying to figure out which seat.
Well, you with midterms, Warnock and Pennsylvania and Fetterman were both plus money to win their Senate seats, and it's like because people were like generally, oh, it's going to be a red wave. So all the Republican candidates got painted as chalk, as if they were really favorites to go. And it's like Herschel Walker and Dr. Oz are not strong candidates, and I wouldn't exactly call them chalk favorites. So Warnock and Fetterman were two of the biggest betting opportunities I found.
Well, with Fetterman, a lot of what affected the betting was him having a stroke and then his debate performance.
Absolutely. And here's the thing: one of the most powerful votes, and people will never understand the people who say, "How could Joe Biden get 83 million votes? He's not a very good candidate. He doesn't excite people." And I'm like, I completely agree. He does not have the charisma of a Barack Obama or a Bill Clinton or a Ronald Reagan. But the most powerful vote in politics is the anti-vote, where people are terrified of the potential other candidate. And the 82 million was a reflection of we don't want Donald Trump again, and the change vote is the most powerful. So it wasn't, I'm not betting on Fetterman, who frankly ran a terrible campaign because he was having these health issues and his debate performance was terrible. I was betting against Herschel Walker and Dr. Oz as candidates. that to me is where the opportunity exists.
I mean, I think part of it is trying to figure out for each specific election, whether it's the United States or a different country, how elastic the electorate is. Because Canada, we know that whatever happens in Ontario and Quebec is usually going to decide the
Yes.
election. Um, the last Canadian federal election, I was betting against a liberal majority because the liberal majority was dependent on them winning seats in the prairies. And
Yes.
I know that you could run Willie Jefferson in Manitoba as a liberal, and the conservatives are still winning that riding.
Yeah.
Or, you can run Bo Levy Mitchell in the Calgary area, and the Tories are
Yeah.
still winning.
It's funny. You talked about needing to win the prairies to win the majority. So there's a lot of correlated outcomes in politics. In order to win if in order to win the grand total big election, you got to win certain areas, and oftentimes you can find some value in correlated outcomes there.
Yeah, definitely. Looking at the correlations, looking if there's like multiple races in the same state, and finding the biggest long shot if you think that party is going to do well.
Yeah.
Because there's like a myth of the split ticket voter that's going to vote for, they're an independent, they don't know who they're going to vote for, so they're going to vote for this candidate, and then they're going to vote for this candidate, the other party.
I also find that there's a lot of value in betting the primaries and finding out who the candidate is going to be. Um, if you remember, we're gonna bore people with the political talk, but I don't know about you.
Well, it's betting
Yeah,
related.
it's betting related. So through the first four states, Joe Biden didn't look like he was going to be the Democratic nominee. It was Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and then South Carolina happened, and Joe Biden wins South Carolina because they have a lot of traditional older white voters, and they line up with Joe Biden. And then what happened within the Democratic Party? So what people don't realize there's a lot of kingmakers behind the scenes, and what you noticed was they said, listen, if we don't back Joe Biden here, Bernie Sanders is going to be our candidate and we're going to lose the general election. So what happened was a lot of the center Democrats, center left Democrats, they started to drop out and throw their support behind Joe Biden. Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren dropped out, went behind Joe Biden and Bloomberg, and then it allowed Biden to power up as the one candidate versus Bernie Sanders. And I think there's an opportunity in the Republican primary right now to do the same because Trump has a sizable lead and he's the betting favorite. But I believe that Ron DeSantis at his price is the best value to bet right now because what's holding people back is Trump has his dedicated 35 to 40% of the base that love him. And then there's the rest of the candidates are splitting the rest of the vote. But eventually it's going to come down to the primaries. And what's going to happen is, a lot of these candidates like Nikki Haley and Mike Pence, I think they're going to end up dropping out because they're going to realize DeSantis is the only guy who can beat Trump. And in order to beat him, he's got to beat him one-on-one so that he gets all the people who are opposed Trump within the Republican Party need to line up behind one candidate in order for him to win. So right now the temperature is Trump's ahead 25 points in the polls, or he said 33 and he's arguing and he said, they're making my lead look smaller than it is. But I don't believe these numbers are relevant to once we get closer to next year's primaries. I believe Ron DeSantis is the guy to win the Republican nomination, and it's going to happen with candidates dropping out and throwing support behind him and letting him go one-on-one with Donald Trump.
Yeah, so you bring up a good point about this upcoming presidential election. Considering that your money is tied up for so long in these presidential election bets, how do you determine your betting strategy for how you lay the money out?
I will never bet it in a credit shop just because um, you can find good bets will never get honored because you'll get booted out. Like I could lose the account week 4 of the football season, and the general election is not till next year. So it would have to be a legal book, and the edge would have to be big enough where it's like, okay, is it worth tying up my money? But again, a lot of people who don't like tying up money, I don't bet football and I don't bet basketball and hockey and baseball. So the need to roll over my money every single week isn't as big for myself. Um, but it's also got to be worth, it's got to be worth the trouble.
Certainly. Now, For the upcoming football season, what is the best advice that you can give betters, particularly ones that aren't professionals, for going after the NFL?
It's very difficult. It's everybody thinks it's funny with football. Like if a sports book's offering you $5,000 at the close, like on XFL, they're not very confident that they have the right number. They're vulnerable. They'll only let you take $5,000 shot at them at the close. If you can on football get $100,000 down, that means the sports book's very confident in the line that they have and what they're doing. Don't think that football, because you enjoy it and it's your favorite sport to watch, is beatable. It's actually one of the most difficult sports to beat. If you're going to and you're still learning, try to bet a little bit earlier in the week as opposed to betting late in the week into an efficient line that's already been hammered into place. And that would be my general advice if you're talking about people who are like entry level, they're just learning about sports betting. It'd be all the cliche stuff. Stay away from crazy 8 leg parlays and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I always try and think about who's listening to this show. So we know that there's certain pro bettors who do listen, but the majority are, bettors that are trying to
Yeah,
win, but that may not necessarily be pro.
yeah, that's the truth. Like, listen, X% of people are pros, but they also know a lot of what we're saying. I find when I'm speaking is to people who are just getting into sports betting or trying to be just at least a little bit better, even if they don't want to be pros. They don't want to be losing money doing this as a side thing.
Yeah, for the most part, I think, okay, what's a reasonable goal for most people listening to this podcast? And I basically think lose less money.
I actually have one. You know what? Don't overreact to games that are extremely out of script. And there's something to football where a game just hits a point where it just gets out of control. A couple turnovers in a row. The scores compounded. The team that's down like mentally checks out and they get blown out 28-0. And if you had these teams closely rated before the game, don't use this opportunity to say, "Wow, this team's way better than the other team." I'd look a little closer. Like, you know what? Sometimes it's just circumstance. Sometimes games just get out of hand based on what happened within the game. So I don't ever overcorrect week to week. It's a bit of a process for me. I will edge and nibble and correct my lines and my power ratings accordingly, but I don't sit there and overreact to one game and say, "Wow, this team is way better," or "This team is way worse than I thought they were."
All right, George, it was a pleasure having you on 90 Degrees this week, and I look forward to seeing what you're up to this football season. And what you're betting on if there's a Canadian federal election this year as well.
I can give you my pick.
Ooh, okay. I want to hear your Canadian betting picks right now.
So 3 years ago, when I was just leaving news media, I fell in love with this star candidate, Pierre Poilievre, who I thought was a political rock star. I believe Pierre Poilievre is going to be the next prime minister of Canada, and I think he's going to win a majority government.
And is Pierre Poilievre the conservative?
He is the conservative leader. He's French speaking, which is very important because you're going to need to win some votes in Quebec and take them away from the Bloc Québécois. And the people have wanted to vote out Trudeau, but the Conservatives have not put up a strong enough candidate to do so. Pierre's the guy, though, to do it.
I mean, that does seem like a pretty sharp angle because the conservatives have had difficulties even during the Harper years of winning in Quebec. So if he can win in Quebec, plus the prairies, he might even get a majority rather than just.
And we've
Uh,
had a problem. Well, I shouldn't say we because I'm not a conservative, but uh, they've had a problem galvanizing the young vote, and that's something Pierre has tapped into more so than any other conservative candidate in the last 30, 40 years.
all right, I'll keep an eye on Pierre. George, thanks for coming on, and we'll check out your podcast during the year to see what sort of insights you got.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
The easiest way to improve as a sports bettor is to use multiple sports books and always get the best odds. We recommend using an odds comparison tool like BetStamp. BetStamp compares odds across every sports book for games, futures, and player props. Save time and money by checking BetStamp before you bet. Download the app today for free. If you're looking to sign up for a new sportsbook account, please check out the offers available at betstamp.app/circles off or hit the link in the description. If you sign up through this page, it helps support the show.
Big bomb bangers.
Thank you for tuning in to 90 Degrees, presented by the Hammer Betting Network and Pinnacle Sportsbook. Head over to our webpage, thehammer.bet, for all your sports betting needs. If you've enjoyed the show, please click that like button. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. Let's cash.
Bangers.